6 years ago now, and then a few years after that I opened a practice in Binghamton, and then just this last year I opened one in Bainbridge here. Due to having moved and being closer here, I wanted to see if I could set something up that would work in this location. So I'm excited. This is the first class I've taught in Bainbridge, and happy you all could come. So yeah.
Happy to be here.
So I'll just introduce myself quickly here. I'm an acupuncturist. My name's Amanda, by the way. I'm an acupuncturist, licensed acupuncturist in New York State, and I work also with Chinese herbal medicine and also nutrition. So those are kind of the three tiers of treatment modalities that I work with. I was trained in Shiatsu, Qigong, and Tai Chi. Those were parts of the training in school. And then I've also been a meditator for probably about 10 years now. So in terms of just my own internal practices and things that I'm doing to keep up my levels of sensitivity, that's kind of what I've been doing. And I guess maybe we'll talk at the end in terms of conditions and things that I work with. But we have about an hour, so I'm just going to go over some real basic ideas of how Chinese medicine works. And then at the end I'll leave it open for questions and things, so I can make sure that anything you're wondering about gets answered. So. The first thing I thought to talk about are just and this is not specific to Chinese medicine per se, but I think in general, like the Asian medical traditions have certain philosophies and definitions of health that are different than we have in the West. So I kind of wanted to just kind of mention those. One is that a good doctor, what does it mean to be a good doctor? Really that means being really sensitive in to one's own self first, and then thus enabling you to become sensitive to someone else. So that's very valued, especially in acupuncture. You have to be really sensitive to what's called your qi, or your own energy. I know you all were just doing yoga, so you have a sense of what that means. What is this? What is this vitality that's moving in my body, and becoming sensitive to that? So that's very valued in Chinese medicine, is being sensitive in that way. And what is a good patient? A good patient, and this is true I think in all traditions, is someone who is ready to make a change, and I like to use the word relax into a course of treatment. Because it's, especially in Eastern medicine, the results are not overnight. We're really working with patterns that we've established, likely over a long period of time. And in order to kind of get to the root cause of illnesses that might be going on in the body, it takes some time. So it's very important, I'd really try to encourage patients to kind of relax into the idea that it's not going to be right now. Everything's not going to turn around right now, because grooves kind of get deep, and if we want to make new grooves, we have to make those get deep and spend some time doing that. So that's good doctor, good patient. And then definition of health is, good health is not like some goal where when we get there it's over. It's really like a process, and it's a continuation. It's something that we're always having to refine and look at and reassess. And also another thing is good to bear in mind is that it doesn't mean that we won't get sick. I mean, that is just the nature of things, is that we have ebbs and flows, and it actually is good to get sick every now and then. It kind of, strengthens us, gets our muscles working and our immune systems and things. So, it's not like it's an absence of illness. It's more about our ability to move more smoothly through the challenges. So, those are just a few definitions I thought I'd share. And then I thought to talk a little bit about the philosophies, about the Eastern philosophy and the Western philosophy. In some ways they're similar. There are some things that they share, but in a lot of ways they're very, very different. In fact, I have a nice handout I thought I would give to you all that shows this, kind of illustrates this. Just pass a few over that way. there's these two bodies there. The one on the left is all these, it's like a machine, there's all these parts inside. You know, and on the right side is, it's more, you know, nature. Waters, rocks, mountains, trees, sky. Yeah, it's really nice. This is truly a very good depiction of, you see even on the top where the photocopy is, philosophy in the West, philosophy in the East. In the West, there's this really strong emphasis on seeing the body as a machine composed of parts.
Right.
And really, you go to the doctor, and they are very specialized usually in one thing, sometimes almost to the exclusion of everything else. And they say, oh, you know, I have this going on with my skin, you know, and oh, you have to go see the dermatologist, you know, or you can't. It's very rare to have a doctor who's kind of really looking at everything as related. And so with that comes this sense of what's called the single cause of illness. Typically Western medicine, something they see is like, what's the one cause? And when we find that one cause, then we can treat that one thing, and then everything's solved. Or if a part's broken, we can remove that part, put in a new one, and everything will work great, you know. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes that is true. So I mean, and in those cases, then that's really great, and it's really, it's not to diminish it at all. But the problem is that it's not all that way. A lot of the times there's multiple causes, and that there's multiple organ systems that are working together, and it's good to be able to understand how they're working together, and maybe find a solution that works with more than one thing at once. So, you know, and then so that's the biggest thing I think in the West, just making sure. Yeah, the theory of germs, that was something that started kind of in the early 1900s, was where they started feeling, oh, bacteria, that's everything, and then viruses, it's everything. And it was kind of like everything else fell to the wayside, all this, maybe other avenues of investigation kind of stopped. Oh, now we would give everything out, antibiotics for everything. It's just kind of a shame, because anyway, it's a very specific view that often overlooks multiple factors that could be involved in what's going on. And then so on the other side, the Eastern view is definitely looking more at relationships. It's very much looking at patterns, and we even when we're trying to make a diagnosis, we gather all the information that we need, we're looking for what are called patterns of disharmony. And when we have the pattern, then we treat the pattern. And that can be something like, for instance, what we might call liver qi deficiency, as an example, or liver qi stagnation, which can be combined with heat in the lungs, for instance. I mean, I'm just throwing it out, but there's multiple things that can be happening at once. And we usually try to list them in priority and say, oh, this is really the main thing, this is sort of a secondary thing. And we're always looking for what's called the root and the branch. So that means we're looking for the root cause, which is usually not actually what brings someone into the office. Usually someone comes into the office because they're sneezing because of their allergies are so bad, like this time of year. Or they're in there because, you know, their stools are not regulated properly right now. But what caused that was before that, you know. So we do really definitely want to treat the branches, because that's our experience, that's what's happening every day, and it's very important, you know. But ultimately, if we don't get to the root, it's not going to really solve the problem. So that's the root and the branch, definitely just a very key, fundamental, you know, core value that's within the medical theory in Chinese medicine. And then also a nice thing, like you can see in this picture, is really this sense of our bodies as being a microcosm of the greater world. So that's huge, and it's not even just in the medical philosophy, actually. It's really just kind of in Eastern view in general, cultural view, that, you know, they're typically very attuned to seasonal changes, looking at, you know, well, what's happening in wintertime when all the energy moves inward? You know, what's happening there? You know, and it's happening on the earth, and it's happening in our bodies. And then in the springtime, like now, there's just this upsurge of energy. It's not in the full bloom state yet. I mean, some of it is, but mainly the energy is just this newness, you know, kind of like sprouting time. And that's happening for us too, you know. I mean, all of us can relate to that. In summertime, just like we're all more outgoing, our energy's out, you know, and available to others. And then in the fall, everything starts to move inward. It's not all the way in yet, but we're starting to kind of go that way. You know, our energy maybe is slowing down a little bit. And that's just totally natural. And, you know, it's good to kind of be aware of those seasonal changes. And likewise, just seeing that we are composed of elements that are similar to the elements that we see outside. So not only these cycles and seasons and rhythms, but also even just what we're composed of. Unlike these parts that are more like mechanical, it's really this like living, dynamic, very vital, this vitality, you know, of nature that we're composed of. So those are really kind of big differences. I mean, the similarities that I can mention that are good to acknowledge too are that in both systems there's definitely a very strong emphasis on anatomy and physiology and just really understanding those processes. So it's, you know, in Chinese medicine we definitely study all that and understand that in the same way. But I think then we add to that, which is unique in Chinese medicine, is this theory of the meridians and the channels, which we'll get into in a little bit. But otherwise, in that sense, they're very similar. So. I did want to talk about the causes of disease, just briefly. We don't have enough time to go into it in great depth, but in Chinese medicine, they talk about 3 different general categories of causes of illness. One of them is called the external causes, and one's the internal, and then the third is just called other. It's this big category.
Keep it simple, huh?
Keep it simple, yeah. There's always all these numbers and lists and things to make all this, you know, it can get very complicated, but, you know, if you can have all these lists in mind, then at least maybe you'll be able to remember it. So the 3 causes, external, internal, and other. The external is what they call the climates. So these are things that are seen to be out in our environment that can enter into our body or, you know, affect us by being exposed to them. So these are wind, cold, hot, dampness, and what's called summer damp, which is a specific type of, it's basically dampness and heat, which comes at the end of the summer when we start getting more like humidity, but it's still hot. And so there's certain conditions, and dryness. I think I missed that one. So that's 6. So, you know, all of these things, like if we're, basically, they become causes of illness either if they're really intense, like the climate's really intense, or say we're like someone who works in an ice cooler, you know, like an ice cream man who's just like always in this cold climate. Ice cream man or woman. Sorry. Or, you know, of course, if we're out in the North Pole or wherever, you know, if we're exposed to extreme conditions or extreme heat for a long period of time, definitely that can affect our health. And in fact, it's not just that it affects us, but those climates actually enter the body. So then we can have conditions that are called wind conditions, heat conditions, cold conditions, dry conditions. And they're just like, I mean, we could go into it a lot more in detail, but basically they look like what they are on the outside is how they affect us. Hot and cold's pretty obvious. It's like if you have those types of conditions, you're going to be averse to cold if it's cold. You're going to be averse to heat if it's heat. You'll have dryness symptoms if it's dry. Dampness is usually like a heaviness. There's a heaviness to dampness. Pain that's considered damp pain is characterized by heavy sensations. I mean, there's a lot more.
Arthritis?
Definitely, yeah. Arthritis can be hot and damp. It can be cold and damp. It can be wind and damp.
Oh.
The wind characteristic is that it's moving. So anything that moves in the body. So like, that's a really good example. It's like, oh, you know, today it's like in my shoulder, today it's in my hip, it's in my ankle.
That's me.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's considered wind. And then the summer damp is what I was mentioning earlier, that kind of heat and damp together. So in a nutshell, that's the external causes. the internal causes are the emotions. So this is definitely something that Western medicine doesn't talk about as much, so closely related to our physical health. You know, we definitely have, of course, there's tons of practices that are talking about emotional health and wellness and how important that is, but in terms of seeing that integration of the internal aspects of our minds being so related to our physical health is really kind of a key. I mean, it has its own category, you know, internal causes. And in the same way, as in the external, like the internal become causes of illness only if they become really extreme. For instance, like anger is one of the emotions. So anger can be very positively expressed in a healthy expression, but if it's expressed or for a long period of time, or it's repressed, or even just like one burst of anger, that if it's really extreme, all of those kind of situations can be a cause of illness physically. And it can show up in a lot of different ways. And again, you know, the class is too short tonight to go into that. It's a great topic though, you know, kind of how certain organs are affected by the different emotions, and like grief affects the lungs, and anger affects the liver. So those emotions can be stored in those organs, and they can be like built up over time. And different things can happen, you know, but it's really important not to discount that if it's not necessarily, it could be a root cause, but it could at least be a factor, an associated cause. So definitely it's important to consider emotions as a possibility. Maybe I'll just list those, what they consider the 5 emotions are anger, joy, grief, fear, and worry. Or sometimes worry is pensiveness, they say, like just thinking a lot, kind of stirring. So fear, you know, I mean, all of those. Even joy, sometimes people are kind of wondering, joy, how is that bad? Or how could that be a cause of illness? But again, it's similar to all the others in the sense that joy should be like appropriately expressed. A lot of times joy can be inappropriately expressed. You know, kind of, maybe you all know someone like that who maybe laughs all the time, kind of nervously, even though it's not funny. You know, that's kind of, that's a good example of that. And they're depleting their energy in a way with that. And they're not, you know, anyway, there's different ways that moves and how that affects us. But so again, all of those, they're not good or bad. It's just, you know, how appropriately are they expressed, or are they being repressed, or someone has an inability to feel joy. It's another one, you know.
I also wonder how often, perhaps or not, if we even think about how the emotions create the stress in our bodies.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that, again, the Western way of looking
don't look at it too much.
And if they do, then you just
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, definitely that happens sometimes. I mean, for sure, there's patients that I've had who, you know, I maybe don't say it right away, but I definitely kind of gently suggest to consider that there may be, you know, maybe decreasing their anger, or, you know, looking at, well, how often am I getting angry? And, you know, maybe that's a good idea to just look at that a little bit, and, you know, and if they do, and it's a big factor, it can be like a total life changer for people.
Sure.
You know, just even that one thing can totally change the way that they feel, and the way they, you know, and their health, and just also just their way of experiencing their lives and feeling a little more relaxed. You know, so it's good. It's good to consider and look at those things a little bit. So that's the external, internal, and then the other causes. So this is a big category. This includes basically everything else, which
The other.
yeah, it means like diet falls into this category, sleep, exercise, also like poisons or parasites, toxins of any kind, and these days like pollution, all of that falls into the other category. Trauma, even just our weak constitution, that's another cause. So. Let's talk a little bit about the basic theory of Chinese medicine is based on what's called yin and yang. I don't know if have you all heard about yin and yang, heard those words? Yeah, so it's actually incredibly profound. You know, we often just see that yin-yang symbol of this black and white. I don't have a picture of it, but I'm sure you all have seen that picture. Yeah, it's in Candace's car. But as a theory, it's like, it's really kind of just, it's really infinite, because it's a theory of all phenomenal existence. So we can use yin and yang to talk about everything we see in nature. We can use it to talk about our bodies, really absolutely everything. It's a means of taking everything that we experience and see in phenomenal experience, and starting to try to make sense of it. So first we can divide it into two sides. It's basically like the line that's drawn, or they say like the image that was used initially in Chinese medicine was of a mountain that has a shady side and a sunny side. Yeah, light and dark. So actually maybe I'll go ahead and pass this handout out. This is a nice little chart. Actually it's on the back side is the yin and yang chart. Yeah. Since I don't have a chalkboard to write these out, but this is really a nice list here. So, yin and yang. So let's start at the top. Yin. Let's stick with yin for a minute, just kind of get a really good sense of yin. It's structure, contraction, absorbing inward, introceptive. That's a funny word. In terms of the body and in health, though, the biggest things that we can think of with yin are this downward and inward. So everything that's like at the deepest level is considered yin. So in terms of the earth, like the earth is yin, whereas the sky is yang. But it's important to remember that this is a theory of relativity, meaning everything's just in relationship to something else. So on one level, this is yin in relation to my other hand, but this might be yang in relationship to what's below it. So we can only, understand that. We have to understand that it's only, this is hot, but only in relationship to that other thing that's cooler than it. But the sun is probably hotter than this, piece of pizza that's in my hand, or whatever.
It's all relative.
All relative. So there's nothing about this theory that's static or fixed. In fact, it's constantly changing. That's the nature of it. That's the nature of our world. That's the nature of our bodies. There's not a moment that anything stands still. And if we can kind of understand that and move with that sense of constant movement, we can kind of get into the rhythm and get into a dance and a flow with that. So that's the idea. I mean, that's the overarching idea. So having a good understanding of what might be considered yin versus what might be considered yang can help us a great deal in understanding the world and in health too. So let's just look at a couple of these other ones. You'll see, if you just kind of read through this list, you get a good sense. Females considered yin, cold, moist, interior, dark, small, weak.
I don't know if I like all those.
Well, one thing I'll say that I always like to make a little asterisk about the masculine-feminine piece, because, we tend to want to hold on to that one for whatever reason and think, oh, all women are yin and all men are yang. And we're all of these.
Oh,
Definitely.
You're right. Yeah, you're right.
Definitely, we all are all of them. And, sometimes we might have more yin, sometimes the same person might have more yang.
Yeah.
It changes. It's totally, it's just constantly changing. So, in fact, I often don't even list the female-male part on there, because in some ways it's just not even all that helpful. But in general, it is true that females are, women are more yin, because yin is the moist aspect of the body. It's the liquid. So we do have more water, more blood in our bodies, that and we have this whole cycle of with the blood every month, you know, and men don't have that. So that's one pretty obvious example of how that can be true. And men typically have more of the yang aspects, which yang is everything that yin is the opposite of everything yin. So yang, it's more upward, outward, more related to the qi aspect of the body rather than the blood. Qi and blood are seen to be what are moving through our channels all the time. So, you know, sometimes we talk about yin and yang, sometimes we talk about qi and blood. It's a little bit more specific to the human body when we talk about it as qi and blood. So women are a little bit more blood, men are a little bit more qi in their dynamic overall. So, yeah, I mean, this is by no means exhaustive because, like I said, we could really use yin and yang theory to talk about absolutely everything. So everything that we look at, we could talk about it in terms of yin and yang. And, you know, I had several teachers when I was going to school, and I also studied for a year in China, and they would always talk about, like, if you understand the theory of yin and yang, you can really always go back to this as the basic, like, and really do so much with just this. Because it is, like I said, I mean, it's just really very profound to contemplate this, so. In terms of determining that pattern of disharmony, how do we come up with that? Well, in terms a patient comes in, we always use 4 methods of diagnosis. And these are basically using our common sense. We look at them, so looking is a huge one, to really like examine, look at the face, look at the eyes. We look at the tongue, that's something kind of unique in Chinese medicine. The tongue is like a little miniature map of the body, so you can really see a lot on the tongue. And then we just look at the general body structure, you know, that can tell you if someone's more yin or more yang, is just what's their body structure like. So looking, then asking, that's where we do a very thorough intake, and I actually brought one of my health intake forms which you can look at, but we really ask a lot of questions to get the whole health history, because again, everything's important because there can be so many factors into why something's happening for someone. So it's really important to gather a lot of information, especially in the beginning. And then, so looking, asking, and listening, that's kind of related to like listening if there's a cough or something that you need to hear, you know, like listening to the lungs. Palpation, touching, this is a big one too. We feel the pulse. You may have heard about that, but again, it's almost like a microsystem too. We can feel the pulse, and by feeling the pulse at different positions on the wrists, we can feel what's going on in the body. And also palpation could include palpating other parts of the body like the abdomen or anything that may be painful or involved in what's going on. Smelling is in the list too, but we don't do that too often unless it's, you know, really important. But usually if something's, you know, falls into that category, someone will just tell you about it. But I mean, if it's really obvious, like if there's a lot of strong odor to someone, you know, usually that indicates heat. So you notice things. I mean, basically, the point is just that your senses are open and engaged and present. You know. So I always say, you know, even though we do get all this history, ultimately it's a very momentary medicine. We're really concerned with what's happening now, because that's what we can change. You know, it's good to know all these other things that happen, but then we do have to tease it apart and see, well, now what's happening. And that's why the pulse diagnosis is so important, because just feeling that can tell you so much about what's happening right now. And that's what we have to work with. We can't work with something that's not there or not available. So. And then in terms of getting those patterns, like I said, so you gather all that information, and then still, how do we get that pattern of diagnosis or pattern of disharmony? We have what are called the 8 principles. And so these are pretty easy to remember, actually. Yin and yang, hot and cold, interior and exterior, and excess and deficiency. So when we have all this information, we categorize it. So is this more hot or more cold? Again, it's like this process of yin and yang, which is why they say if you understand yin and yang, then that's everything. But still, you can kind of get a little more specific with these 8 principles. Is it more yin and yang? Is it more hot or cold? Is it more deep in the body, or is it more on the surface of the body? And is it excess or deficiency? Is it too much of something or too little of something? And that can tell you a whole lot. You know, you can really do a lot with just that information. So again, you know, similarly, my teachers would always say, you know, if you get somebody and there's just so much going on, it's so complicated, always bring it back to the 8 principles. And it just really can quickly clarify a lot. So that's coming to those patterns. I guess I'll just mention quickly a little bit about the treatment options, and just so you can understand those. Like if you want to flip your sheet over, I think on the back is this nice just model of the body with the meridians on it. So meridians is another word for channels. These are longitudinal pathways on the body, front and back, that on them lie these acupuncture points. And acupuncture points are basically little places where the energy in our body, the chi and the blood, that's what's moving through these channels, where those can gather or pool a little bit. So in some places, you know, like you'll notice, I mean, there's points on the hands, there's points at the tips of the fingers, there's points, you know, on the face. I mean, they're everywhere, all along the scalp, on the feet. So in those places, those points where that chi and blood is pooling is very small. It's just a tiny little bit. In fact, they call it just a well. They have names for these. These are well points. And then they start to come into what's called a spring, and then a river, and then an ocean at the bigger joints. So those points typically are bigger, actually. So, you know, more or less, you know, for instance, if we've determined that there's a deficiency of some kind, and then there's heat, maybe there's 2 things happening at once, we want to strengthen that deficiency. So there's certain points, I mean, we learn every single one of these points, and they have a wide variety of energetic uses. And we can specifically strengthen something that is deficient. And we can clear heat by using these different points on the body. And, you know, there's different depths and levels and everything. In fact, there's something like 72,000 channels on the body. On this picture, there's only 12. So here we're just looking at what are called the 12 main meridians, where the acupuncture points lie. But it's good to kind of remember, you know, again, we're a 3-dimensional body, and we have these channels that are much deeper in the body, some that are very superficial. And there's the minute channels they're just very numerous. I mean, you can really think about it like the circulatory system. I think that's a really helpful way of envisioning it, because it is very similar in that way, where we have all these tiny little capillaries that interconnect and connect these main channels like deeper into the body, deeper to the organs, and that's why we can do what we're doing. But they're very palpable. It's very interesting once, you know, you become sensitive to it. I mean, you can feel the points. It's not just that you know exactly where they are. I mean, you can definitely feel them. And usually, you know, you can tell a difference if your hand, if you just lightly go over a point, usually your finger will kind of dip in if a point is deficient. And if it's a little bit full, then that's more of an excess. There can be thermal changes where it feels a little hot, a little cold. So, and you know, people like to always know, well, how does this work like in terms of Western definitions? Well, what's really happening? And you know, I mean, that's not my expertise, is not studying that side of things as much, but I mean, definitely studies have shown that acupuncture, by nature of receiving acupuncture, neurotransmitters are released from the brain, which is why, just as a nice side benefit of acupuncture, that people typically feel really good. They just feel kind of happy and just, you know, like a little bit on a cloud after a treatment. So that happens. Also, aside, just empirical effective acupuncture is lowering the blood pressure. So those are things that just happen even if you're not using specific points to do that. Just receiving acupuncture does that. but reduces inflammation. Those are things that they can see are happening in the body biochemically. So that's acupuncture, definitely. I mean, that's a huge part of what in terms of tools that I use is acupuncture. But then, particularly if there's more like internal medicine complaints or imbalances, then herbal medicine is very useful and helpful. Herbs really work in a similar way to foods. So, I mean, another reason why I work with foods too is because, again, it's not just this mysterious thing that kind of works and who knows why it works. It's actually very scientific why foods, foods do what they do and herbs do what they do. Is they have, again, thermal properties. They have flavors that are really specific. And because of that, they enter certain parts of our bodies more easily. Some foods are more heavy in nature or descending. Some foods or herbs are more ascending. Some are scattering or invigorating of our energy. And so if we know this, then we can, eat foods which are more general and definitely can be medicinal. But herbs are a little bit more potent. So, that's why we can't, unless we're really healthy, which, we can do so much with food, definitely. But usually if there's a kind of a chronic illness or something that's like pretty severely out of balance or it's been going on for a long time, herbs are really a great option because we can, especially in combination with acupuncture, we can kind of shift things a little more quickly. But again, it's not an overnight, it's not like taking a pill, which is good because again, we're working at a more root level, we're creating healthy patterns to, really lead us to a longevity, greater longevity and health, and also without the side effects that often Western medicine has. So that's really good to remember. And I guess maybe that's all I'll say for now. We have about 15 minutes or so left, and I'll just open it up if people have questions.
Do you do like counseling with your foods and herbs to?
Yeah. Well, with foods, yes. Where I can recommend, these would be good foods to add into your diet. These would be foods that would be good to avoid. But with herbs, I do sometimes say, maybe go to the health food store and pick up this, because I don't have a big pharmacy or anything in my offices, but then I do work with custom herbal formulas, so I write prescriptions for patients that are, specific to them. And sometimes I'll use what are called the patent herbal medicines, which are these classical formulas that are just really, they've been used for thousands of years, and if it doesn't need to be changed, then I can use that one too. But oftentimes I find it's good to customize it or change it, because usually people have need a little bit of this, a little less of that,
So you said you open up a shop here?
Yeah, in Bainbridge.
Where are you located?
Just that way.
Is
Just over
that
the railroad
Kirby?
tracks.
I looked online. Is that for Kirby?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what you're gonna have
It's
it
just really like a minute this way.
So you open ready and so
Yeah, I'm there
maybe
one day a
appointment
week.
at a time, 1 day a
Yeah,
week?
it's definitely by appointment only, but yeah, I'm
Yes.
there every week.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're mainly in Ithaca?
Well, I just move around, so Ithaca, Binghamton, and here.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
How are we going to keep up with all that?
Keep up with what?
How are we going to keep up with
Thanks.
three different places? After a sit down like this, I would imagine half the people in here are going to come at least. Half of us would come to you and say, listen, I need your help.
Yeah.
That's the spreading yourself thin, but by the same token, I guess, you're taking out a big area. Ithaca,
Yeah.
this area and down into Binghamton, jeez.
That's true. Maybe I said that. I started in Ithaca because I was living there at the time, and since then I've moved closer to here, and so just practically I've just kind of, my vision long term is to pull away from Ithaca. So if this practice could grow, it is growing, but eventually.
How far out from the time someone would call until they have an appointment with you, I guess?
Usually by the next week.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So, once again, I don't enter into it with skepticism. I've actually had acupuncture performed before. Chronic problems, chronic pain, chronic, anything as was mentioned here in your brochure. I mean, these are all things, I mean, Jesus, I look at half of this thing. Help. So I guess I enter into it and I said, geez, how do we get all this squared away? But I do understand through what you've talked about that it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, and it takes working together to.
Definitely. That's really a key piece is like that kind of committing to a process of changing your life, you know, and looking and using, you know, usually it really means multiple avenues, you know, not just the acupuncture, not just the herbs, you know, looking at what am I eating, and also like what's my mental state, you know, really looking at those things is a very valuable thing to do. And but that's why we have to make it a process, because those are big things, you know, each one of them on their own is a big thing, and so yeah, we take baby steps.
Baby steps are good.
When someone's ready to leap, they can leap too. So it's not to say that, you know. And when people call and ask about pain, you know, oh, is this going to take me? Like, how long is this going to take? And you know, definitely a rule of thumb is the longer it's been, it can take longer. But even that said, I mean, many times I have people come in like with chronic knee pain that it doesn't take that long for them. Maybe a few weeks. Maybe, I mean, even in the first weeks, they can notice dramatic improvement.
Sure, so, it depends on your everyday life.
Definitely,
whether you're stressing your body every day or mentally, physically, whatever the case may be.
Definitely. Like carpal tunnel, you know, people who, if that's caused by their computer work, and they still have to do their computer work, you know, they might have some improvement or relief, but it's not going to probably go away unless they can really dramatically change something, like get a different keyboard or, you know, so.
I can't tell you how uncomfortable I am just sitting here for this amount of time. No, it's okay. I'm simply saying, I know where I stand in this, and the options have been few. Put it that way, the options have been few. So I, you know, when Cheryl told me about this, I think, I'll check this out in a moment's notice.
One option is to just rest up against the wall.
I know. I want to stand up, but I don't want to be rude. I mean, legs, everything. I mean, but this isn't something to be, you know, I thought about enrolling in yoga previously. I'm thinking, holy cow, can I even get down on the floor and get up without growing in the morning? You know, seriously, I don't consider myself relatively young.
Well, you don't start in the middle.
No, I know. No, it's once again, I said earlier, I'd have to go at the very beginners.
Yeah, not you, but.
You're there, okay.
I am. And I'm the one that's moaning and groaning.
As you mentioned, over so much time, and the stress on the body, different ailments, different injuries, whatever, it comes to a point when you feel, can I recover from this physically? And of course, it always has the mental effect when you're in different degrees of discomfort from the time you get up in the morning until the time you go to bed at night. And beyond, waking up after 3 or 4 hours, and you know, I'm up for rest. I have to go sit in the recliner because I can't lay down anymore. So these are things. Once again, I mean, the options. You go to the doctor, and well, you know, here's the prescription, and I refuse to do that. No, I can't do that.
But when the prescription ends, then what?
Exactly. No, I'll be very honest with you. 2 years ago, I was prescribed, you know, the hydrocodone for the chronic pain, and I went back after a week and I said, I won't do this, and I haven't. Even through an insurance company, why they'd rather prescribe me. They'll pay for the narcotics, but they won't pay for
Acupuncture.
Exactly.
Massage therapy.
It's insane.
Massage therapy.
That's incredible. I think acupuncture, massage therapy it should be a way of life. Like
Yes.
it's not an option.
Right.
You know, we're quick to take our cars for alignment and we don't go to a chiropractor. You know, I just don't get it. So
Yeah, that's,
The options are frustrating at times, and until somebody like yourself comes into the picture, where do we turn?
yeah.
we fight like hell. We do what we can.
I just wanted to say something after what you said, just about how that's such a key difference again in that east and west view, because in China, they, especially like, and not so much now, but I think, but definitely not that long ago, maybe 100 years ago, 150 years ago, and back, it was just standard to regularly see the acupuncturist and Chinese medical doctor. And in fact, I love this. When I heard this in school, I just never forgot it. But that you would pay your doctor for these regular visits. But if you got sick, you didn't have to pay, because it was the doctor's job to keep you healthy.
Oh my God.
Isn't that? It's just a reverse.
Yes.
It's a totally reverse system.
It's a progressive way, and it's true. I mean, and they did do that, you know, you paid your doctor to keep you well.
Yeah. So again, like this emphasis on wellness and health, whereas nowadays it seems like that's kind of shifted to an emphasis on like not being well and unhealthy. Anyway,
We have to take care of, we always take care of disease. We're not being progressive about our health.
Yeah.
So.
Would you just explain the procedure a little bit?
Oh, sure. Yes. In fact, I was going to just demonstrate acupuncture on myself for anyone who hasn't seen it done. This
I
can.
have never seen.
Okay. Yeah. So this might take.
that face.
It might take some of
I
the weirdness of it out, because it's just not a big deal. I mean,
What
actually,
they do
that's.
is they strap you down.
And once you've had it, it's not a big deal anymore. It's not a big deal anyway. But so typically, the needles are various sizes and everything. But this is a standard size needle, and they're tiny. They're hair thin. I'll just show you here.
I would give you a brighter light, but I don't think it's trying.
Just totally, very. So I'm just going to do this on myself, because otherwise I'd have to have you sign a consent to treatment form if I was going to do it on any of you. But typically, and because I'm doing it on myself, I'm not doing. Normally, what I do is definitely I clean all the acupuncture points first with alcohol. But this, I know who I am, or at least I know that I'm not contaminating myself. So basically, you find the point. This is a really commonly used point on the hand. So I'm just going to do this one.
And it's
This
called,
is.
what's it called?
This is called, large intestine 4, they're numbered.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, this point is used it's a major point for anything having to do with the face or head. So definitely used in headaches, but probably its second most common use is just for moving the energy in the body. It's just a strong chi moving point. So you can definitely use this anytime there's pain in the body. So basically you just find the point, press on it, and if I always use 2 hands. Of course I'm just using one now because I'm doing this on myself. But typically they say when you're doing acupuncture that the left hand is like the mother and the right hand is like the samurai. So I always like that analogy. So the left hand is always there. What's that?
The mother leads, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, and the mother is always present there, even if it's right next, holding something, or holding the point, or right next to the point. It's there to just kind of soothe and hold and relax.
And may I just say something? If you ask everyone, they can find L4.
Yeah, L4.
If you just palpate a little bit, you're going to.
Yeah, it's these
feel.
2 prominences. Find those 2 bony prominences on your hand, and then it's right in the middle, and it's just off the edge of the bone. That's the technical description of that point, because there's actually a couple other points on this same line.
And you
But
can
you have to
feel.
go. If you press on that, it's tender for most
Yeah,
people.
it's very tender.
There's a tenderness there. Some people might be more tender, might be less than other people. So anyway, you find that point with the left hand, and then with your samurai hand, meaning just with your precision, you know exactly where you're going, exactly. And we have this is a guide tube, or an insertion tube. So you just set that exactly over the point, and then then you just tap the needle like that.
Can you see it?
And actually, in some,
Yeah.
in the Japanese tradition, they would leave it about like that. They wouldn't even do much with it. They might put it in just a tiny more like that. So I'm trained in both traditional Chinese and traditional Japanese acupuncture. Really different schools and styles.
So does it depend on the patient's?
Body type mainly,
Yeah.
of which you would use, yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, particularly like someone who's really sensitive or very more thin in body type. I usually use more the Japanese style because it is very more subtle, more superficial level. But it's really kind of, I mean, both are really effective, I definitely. And sometimes I'll do a combination, you know. So that's it, you know. And then when you get the needles in, usually there's anywhere from 10 to 20 needles, depending again on what's going on, how many you might need. And also if I'm using the Japanese style, usually you use more needles actually. The Chinese style uses fewer needles, so that might be something to consider. But then once they're in and you just really relax with them in, I usually play music if someone likes, or it can be quiet, and you just really rest for about 30 to 40 minutes.
And you can't feel that?
Oh, I feel it, but it's not like,
Pain.
it's nothing like getting blood drawn or something like that. I mean, it's more just, the sensation I feel is more just after the fact of my own energy in my body, so that qi. So that's actually what they say in Chinese acupuncture, that when you're needling, you're trying to catch the qi. And that's another reason why the
awareness.
practitioner needs to be really sensitive, is because they can feel the qi. I try to feel the responsiveness of the patient's body as I do that, and then once I feel that, then that's it. You know, and usually somewhere in between that 30 to 40 minutes, I'll come in, feel the needle. I always just feel the needle first to see, is it still engaged? If it is, then I don't do anything. But it depends on the technique that I'm trying to do, because again, if I'm trying to clear something, I might really stimulate it more. And there's a lot of different needle techniques. So this is what would be just called the even needle technique. I just tapped it in and left it. But then there's all kinds of different things we can do with it in terms of direction, movement, to specifically change the qi or the blood in a specific way. So yeah.
So do you do a series of acupuncture and then you do like a maintenance once every 3 months, like a cleansing kind of thing?
Yeah, again, that just kind of depends on the person. I see definitely quite a few number of people, a good number of people who just want to come in regularly, like once. I mean, I see a lot of people weekly who are not really all that unhealthy, you know, and they just like, it keeps them healthy.
Keep up preventive.
So you know, people really like doing it that way. Some people come, you know, once every other week. And it just kind of depends really on what's recommended. Depends on the person's body for sure, and what's going on, and like how much do they need, you know, because some people like really do get a lot at once a month, or you know, I'd say if you go much less frequently than once a month, it's not as, I wouldn't even really call it maintenance so much, because a lot can change in 3 or 4 months for somebody. So I usually recommend, if someone's saying maintenance, like once a month is good. Try to come in once a month. So, yeah.
How much would a session cost? And like when you first come in, you have a consultant, you consult each, you get to know each other and diagnose them. Do you get your acupuncture that day, or do you reschedule like an hour of getting to know each other, finding the solution, finding the issues or what's going on, and then the next appointment? So how would that work?
Yeah. Usually the first session, usually there's time for a treatment that session too, but it does depend. I mean, sometimes someone needs to really use the whole hour to talk, you know, and that's fine too. But I usually like it if we can get a treatment in, because I mean, it's good to get the process going. But sometimes that process is about just the information gathering. So, but every session that I schedule is an hour. So I always give an hour, you know, for the initial, and also all follow-ups are an hour. And then, you know, the first treatment usually is 90. You asked about the cost,
Yes.
and then 75 after that.
Yes.
Yeah. And then when I'm working with people on an ongoing basis, I also have a little package.
Yes. Thank you.
So that's a little bit cheaper.
I was always curious, you know, I never asked the price. I know I always wanted to experience it, but I just never knew what's the range.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
about
that's pretty
massage
standard.
therapy, because I do that, so,
Yeah,
interesting, thank you.
sure.
And you mentioned you had that intake form that you
Oh,
would
yeah,
do
if you wanted
before
to
or then,
see-
or?
I'll just pass this. This is just an example of my health intake. So you can see what kinds of questions I ask and that. I'm going to remove this if you're interested in seeing that, or just pull it out. Doop. No big deal.
Was it good?
So even with that, actually, there's a whole technique involved with like what they call opening or closing the hole. So when you remove the needle, if you're wanting to strengthen a deficiency, for instance, then you want to close the hole. So you put your finger over it, and if you're wanting to clear, then you leave it open. You don't touch it at all. You just pull it out.
Interesting.
So
Well, I'm glad you're
all of the
here.
needles are single use, by the way. So we won't use this again. They're all. I mean, that's definitely.
I think it's a beautiful modality,
Yeah.
acupuncture. You know, I just think it's so interesting for us to sit and listen to a different way of thinking in the Eastern way,
Right.
and how we blend, or how we are nature and the elements and all of that, that we flow in and out of all of that. It's such an easier way of looking at our health.
Yeah, and it's more just common sense, I think.
Yeah, it just goes with the flow.
Yeah.
It goes with the rhythm of life and nature and all that.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, and usually just if we stop and to think about it or look at it, I mean, not even for too long, most of us can see that, it makes sense. It's not like this big foreign thing.
I think a lot of us don't. If we're not introduced to that, then I don't know if it's...
Yeah. No, I mean, I just mean, once we're introduced, it's not too hard to follow it, because it's, yeah.
To visualize it and realize, as you're saying, I mean, if you have any skepticism for Western medicine, and you've say seen any documentaries and whatnot on Eastern medicine, and you're familiar in any way with acupuncture, with the healing properties of food and so forth, and realize that this all plays a part in all of our systems every day within each of our bodies. Why? But once again, it's okay. Where do we turn?
Yeah.
And most of us live with, well, many people may live with just constant discomfort, and you live with that. In the case of a family physician, why, once again, we're going to prescribe you medications, which most of them will cause other side effects and issues within our own bodies. Personally, I think I've gotten to the point where I live with the discomfort every day, and it affects me mentally, physically, and how do I say it? I guess just feeling at peace.
Yeah,
I think
just
a lot of people just brush it off. That any acupuncture, any herbs, foods we eat, be it organic, or if you go buy vegetables from the local grocery store, they brush it off if there's any properties there that can actually benefit us.
And that's just not knowing too, it's just kind of like,
Absolutely.
which is why I really like to teach these classes like this, because it can just demystify some of these things that are just, again, it's like we were just saying a second ago, if you don't know, you're not introduced to it, then you don't know, but then once you're introduced to it, you're empowered, you kind of can look into it more on your own and think about it and do something, because we can do something, we can change how we eat, we can choose to take, a different type of medicine and try different therapies. I mean, those are just choices that we can make.